Hi everyone, Karen Cecilia here. Still celebrating Pride Month, and I hope you're enjoying the videos. Please remember to like the videos and share them if you believe that somebody need to hear the stories. All the stories are historically true, and I'm trying to bring as many of them to you as I possibly can. So, Pride is happening all over the world, and believe me when I tell you, there will be Pride in Africa as well. We will see some videos coming out of Africa on pride, even though Africa is such a depressingly backward continent, still blaming white people for everything that is bad down there and denying people their equal rights to exist. And the last 10 years has been very good for the LGBTQ plus community. And I have, in spite of all the laws and rules that still threatens many of our brothers and sisters across the world, I am confident that the next decade, the next 10 years, will be also good for the LGBTQ plus community. So I want to share another story with you about a woman inventor. Oh yeah, one female inventor who loved women. In 1870, a man filed a patent that he did not write. The design that he was filing belonged to a female inventor named Margaret Knight. But of course, being 1870, man's world, man's rules, man's laws, he assumed that Margaret wouldn't fight back. After all, she was a woman and a 30-year-old factory worker. He had no reason to believe that she could stand up to him. Charles Annan, this man, he was an established Boston machinist. Him no need anybody to introduce him. He was well known. He was a man who understood the foundries, a man who knew the patent office very well, had many friends there, a man with capital and resources, connections. He knew the rules and the laws, probably helped write them too, of the era. So he had no fear of Margaret Knight. He can just take her patent and decide that he's going to make it his own. Margaret Knight worked at the Columbia paperback factory in Springfield, Massachusetts. The year was 1867. At the time, paperbacks were kind of a frustrating compromise. They were shaped like envelopes, some of you might remember that, with simple V-shaped bottoms. They held very little volume. The moment a grocer set one on a counter, it tipped over, spilling flour or sugar across the floor. It was frustrating. But at the same time, a flat bottom bag existed, but it was a luxury item. It had to be folded and glued entirely by hand. The factory employed 30 women working 12-hour shifts just to paste the paper. The air in the facility smelled constantly of wet adhesive and wood pulp and dried glue. The manual work was slow, repetitive, and yes, expensive, which means keeping the flat bottom bag out of reach for everyday commerce, out of the reach of ordinary people. For this female inventor, Margaret, the inefficiency in the paper bag wasn't just a daily chore. For her, it was a mechanical puzzle waiting to be solved, and Margaret intended to solve it. Margaret set out to automate the process of making flat bottom paper bags. Now, let me remind you or tell you that Margaret possessed no formal engineering training or a degree. Margaret barely made it through middle school. But what Margaret did was this. She built a wooden model in her boarding house, working by lamplight after her 12-hour factory shift ended each day. The challenge was not simply folding the paper. The machine that Margaret imagined had to feed a continuous roll of paper. It had to cut it to a precise length, fold the bottom into a square, apply the paste, and press it dry, all in a fraction of a second. Over that, it has no use. Her initial folding mechanism jammed constantly. The paper fed through the wooden rollers unevenly, tearing before it even reached the blade. Margaret spent 6 months adjusting the gears. She carved new cams from wood, altering the timing by millimeters. The machine finally folded the paper correctly, but the glue didn't hold. The timing of the paste application was fractions of a second off, leaving the seams weak and unusable. So Margaret went back to the drawing board, and she rebuilt the spring mechanism entirely. She calculated the precise velocity needed for the blade to cut without stalling the feed. She ran hundreds of test runs, filling her small room with ruined paper and dried glue. By late 1868, the machine worked. It successfully cut, folded, and glued a flat-bottomed paper bag at a speed that manual laborers could not match. Now, at the time, the United States Patent Office required more than just sketches, more than just drawings, more than a schematic to grant a mechanical patent. The 1870 patent law mandated a working iron prototype to prove that the concept was physically viable. Without an iron model, an inventor had no legal protection, regardless of how many sketches that they produce, how many schematics they produce. For working class inventors, this requirement acted as an economic filter. Converting a wooden model to cast iron required capital and resources. It also required access to a specialized machine shop and, of course, weeks of labor. So Margaret hired a machine shop in Boston to cast her wooden model into iron. It was a slow, expensive process. One day, Charles Annan walked into that very said machine shop for an unrelated business matter, but he saw Margaret's wooden machine, sitting on a workbench. He studied the folding mechanisms, the feed rollers, and the exact placement of the gears. He didn't ask questions. He didn't speak to the machinist about the inventor. He simply left the shop, drafted a schematic based on what he had memorized, and submitted a patent application for the same exact design. Weeks later, the government approved it. When Margaret found out, she sat down for 2 hours and she thought it through. She didn't cry. She didn't make a noise. She didn't write a letter of complaint. Of course, she didn't accept the theft as a consequence of her gender or class. She simply considered him to be a low-level, low-class thief. Margaret hired a prominent patent attorney. The legal fees immediately drained her life savings. When she ran out of money, she refused to drop the case. Instead, she surrendered a percentage of her future royalties to a local Massachusetts businessman just to afford the train tickets to Washington, D.C. and keep her lawyer on retainer. The patent interference hearing took place in 1870. And of course, Charles Annan came armed with society laws and rules, armed with a man's world argument. His legal defense did not rely on engineering principles. He did not explain how he calculated the gear ratios or how he designed the feed rollers. No, he never had to. He argued that the design was simply too complex for a woman to have created. He stated on the record that no woman possessed the mechanical dictates to invent such a machine. His argument was entirely cultural and societal. He relied on the bigoted time of the era, He relied on the assumption that the men adjudicating the case would find the idea of a female machinist absolutely absurd. Plus, he decided to add a little sugar to his argument. He went on to become dirty. So he said that, plus, yes, she's a woman. She's an unmarried woman. Plus, she's a woman that visits the brothel. And he named the brothel because she has sexual pursuits and desires for young women at the town's brothel. He made specific mention of Margaret's interest in a particular young woman named Clara. He mentioned how 2 nights a week Clara spends with Margaret at her boarding house. He went on and on about Margaret's sexuality. For a brief moment in the court proceeding, the judge asked Margaret if his accusations were true. Margaret very calmly replied to the judge, "Perhaps, Judge, the question should be if my dalliances, as Mr. Adam has outlined them, are illegal." The court was quiet for a second. Then Margaret pounced and Margaret said, "Maybe Mr. Adam should pay more attention to his own wife." The courthouse roared. Hannam's face turned red. So yeah, he had the finished iron model. He had the approved paperwork bearing his name. And he just outed Margaret in court. And he thought that's all he needed to win. Margaret Knight did not argue about philosophy and societal norms or culture. She didn't whine about she being a woman and them trying to steal anything from her. No, she didn't do that. Margaret simply opened her bags. She presented 2 years of handwritten diary entries, tracking every mechanical failure and adjustment in precise technical language. She produced the flawed wood models, several of them, showing the exact points in each of them where the paper had jammed in 1867. She laid out the mathematical calculations, the dated sketches, and the specific gear ratios that she had tested, documented, discarded, and retrieved for the court. Then Margaret brought witnesses. She presented Clara, who testified and verified that, yeah, Margaret visits the brothel and I am her favorite and I spent 2 nights a week with her, yeah. Margaret was a badass, so was Clara. But Margaret also brought other witnesses from the board house who testified to hearing the machine clattering late into the night. She showed the court the painstaking physical evolution of a machine that Annan could only show in its final polished form. He had nothing when the judge asked, "Mr. Annan, when did you first sketch this?" He had nothing. "Mr. Annan, do you have something you discarded when you did something miss and he had nothing. He could only show the machine in its final polished form. He brought an assumption to the court. Margaret brought the math. The patent office, of course, revoked Annam's claim, and on July 11, 1871, patent number 116842 was issued to its rightful owner, Margaret E. Knight. Margaret went on to establish the Eastern Paperback Company. She filed 26 more patents over her lifetime, inventing shoe-cutting machines, rotary engines, and window frames. Margaret never grew wealthy from the work. She often sell the patents for a fraction of their commercial value just to fund her next project to invent something else. But the machine that she engineered in that boarding house became the foundation of a global packaging industry. The fundamental mechanics of her design are still the ones used in manufacturing today. If you walk into any grocery store this afternoon and ask for a paper bag, it will have a flat bottom. Thanks to Margaret Knight. Her original model sits in a glass case at the Smithsonian. Margaret Knight, a brave, talented inventor. The woman who built the machine that they couldn't steal. In this Pride Month, I applaud and celebrate the bravery and genius of Margaret E. Knight. Thank you all for listening. Please remember to like and share. God bless you all. Stay safe, everybody. And do remember to keep our children safe.